Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
And welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. As you will see, I'm not in my usual space. We've firstly, it was highlighted in one of the past episodes that you could see the Human Factors Podcast logo in my funky neon sign, but actually back to front. That was slightly annoying from my behalf, but one of these things that I didn't realize until afterwards when I had the mirroring on the camera the wrong way around. It just shows that technology can trip us up even when we think everything is running smoothly. But talking about running smoothly, we want to talk today a bit more about the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. For those of you in the UK, this is our professional home. And really, I'm quite keen to get more insights. And with some of the interviews that we've had in the past, you know that we've been talking to sort of key members and key people within the CIEHF about what happens. And today, he wants to give us that bit more insight into how it runs. For those of you who are not aware, the CIEHF runs a lot of events, a lot of activities, everything from Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, which we've just recently attended for this year, as well as everything from webinars, meetups, and it also publishes guidance, best practice. But as one of the largest Ergonomics and Human Factors organizations in the world, you'd think that the cast would, the staff would be a cast of, if not hundreds, then certainly high tens. But actually, the staff the number of staff is a relatively small number, and when you consider the huge amount they deliver, I still find that absolutely fascinating. So today we're going to meet one of the newer stars of the staff cast, and we talked to Ben Peachey. I keep on saying relatively new CEO, but he's actually been here for quite a while. So Ben, thank you for joining us, and welcome to 1202.
Thanks, Barry. Yes, I have to admit, I joined in September last year, and I think it was about 2 months ago that I stopped pretending I was new. I think I was in a meeting with someone. I said, I'm new to this job. And I thought, am I new? Yeah, I'm not new anymore. But as we'll learn, it's been a great journey so far.
Fantastic. So let's get stuck straight into it then. What is your current role, and what does that mean to you on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, yeah. So I am, the chief executive, as you said, of the Chartered Institute for Ergonomics and Human Factors. My job is to lead the team. So we have a team of 5 staff, including myself, and then we have a couple of contractors as well who work with us. In terms of things that I do, I think the main thing is that my job is to help the trustees, of which you're one, to fulfill their duties as custodians of the organisation. So it is, the Institute is a member organisation. It's a charity that is not for profit, and it's run in the interests of its members, but also in the interests of advancing the profession. So I am accountable to the trustees, basically. So that's my number one thing. So I have a fortnightly meeting with the president, which is yourself at the moment. So it started off with Alex Steadman, your predecessor, who's still also on our executive committee. The trustees meet 4 times a year. So I'm in a sort of ongoing cycle of preparing materials for those meetings, then acting on the decisions that get taken in those meetings. We've got a meeting coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So the back end of last week, I was putting the agenda together for that meeting. And one of the key things, because we've just had our member elections, we have 5 new trustees coming on to what we call the council. So this meeting in June, we're going to be doing some trustee training. So that's one of the key things I'm working on at the moment, is doing the trustee training. So I think that's the sort of first key thing that I do. Secondly, my role is to build a more effective organisation. So at the moment, we're in the process of getting ISO 9001 certification, which I think is really going to help us improve how we run the organisation. And I think I'm almost at the back end of a process of the Institute in its various titles been around for nearly 75 years. It's our 75th anniversary next year. But I would say it's probably in only the last 10 to 15 years that it's really thought we need to be a professional organisation. And so I'm playing a part in that development. So we're, as I said, pursuing ISO. So one of the things I did recently was just sort of looking at the things that we do and describing them as products and services. And I think that was a really healthy exercise to do, and we'll be presenting that work to the trustees in June. We're just in the process of putting or improving our performance review system, so creating a new template for our performance development for our staff to help them in their career development and to help them know what their goals are in their jobs. And then the other thing I do on that front as well is I engage in a number of CEO networks. So there are lots of professional organizations out there. So my peers are people who run other member bodies. So I'm in a couple of CEO networking groups, and I find those tremendously valuable in the same way, I guess, as the members of the Institute find being able to network with their sort of peers. I network through my peers there and learn a lot that way. So, for example, I've just been asked to or consider joining a steering group that's focusing on equality, diversity and inclusion with other CEOs, which I think will be tremendously valuable for me.
Cool.
I also support the team. So obviously part of my job is providing direction to the team, helping them ensure that they have the tools, the resources, the understanding of what they're working on and how it fits into the bigger picture of our strategy and annual work plan, which I'm responsible for, and then helping them with any decisions or any input they need from me. So I think that's a key part of what I do, is helping them to do their jobs well. And then two other key areas. So relationship building. So I need to look outside the organization. So a good example of this is the degree apprenticeship. So there's been a group of practitioners who are mainly sort of members, but have been working together to develop the human factors specialist degree apprenticeship. And excitingly, that's been sort of a group of people who work employers, but also working with some universities. And we just got the news late last week that the funding application for that has been approved, which is very exciting. So it now means the universities, which is Coventry, Cranfield and Loughborough, can now move forward with developing the human factors specialist master's degree apprenticeship. And then, the idea is that companies will then put apprentices into that scheme. And so, I've played a role of really sort of trying to support that. I wasn't involved in the team who put it together. So Chris Vance from MBDA deserves a lot of credit. He was the driving force behind it. And there are, a number of other people and other employers and universities that supported him. But as us as an institute, it's in our interest that that's successful. So we're trying to lean in and support it. So that's one example. And then finally, I do what I call learning and engaging. So, I'm fairly new to human factors, as I'm sure we'll explore more in this podcast. So I'm trying to build my human factors knowledge, reading The Ergonomist, that's put together by my colleague that many of you know, Tina Worthy, and I was a guest on the podcast late last year. So reading that, engaging in social media. And I'm trying to sort of now transition a bit more to just sort of being a passive learner to being more of an active learner. So in the last few weeks, those of you who are active on LinkedIn, you might have seen my posts a bit more, and that's certainly part of my job, to be out there championing the human factors profession, both within the profession, but also those we want to engage with.
No, it's interesting to see. Well, firstly, the LinkedIn piece, which I guess we can come on to a bit later as well. That it does seem to have taken on a bit more of a life of actually being. You can actually actively engage on it more so than I think historically. It seems to have revamped itself without changing, which I think is a bit. I don't know whether that's a product of the pandemic or whatever, but it does seem to be a slightly better place.
Yeah, look, I think so, and I think it is, and it's really interesting. I feel very lucky joining the organisation at the time that I'm joining it, because I'm building on some good successes. So my predecessor put a lot of effort into building that presence on social media, which I think was really important, especially during COVID, which was a challenging time for everyone. But certainly member organisations. I was working in another member organisation at the time, and where face-to-face engagement was the number one value add that we delivered. So we had to change that up. And I don't know obviously in detail, but I know the institute also went through that process of how do we morph what we do during COVID. And I think it's really important that you're out there talking about what's going on in the profession. So I think LinkedIn is a really key engagement tool that we have.
So you mentioned that obviously human factors and ergonomics wasn't your first love. You stumbled upon us almost to a certain extent. How did that happen? How did you, I've got no idea how you go and find a CEO role. How did that happen, and how did you stumble upon us?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and the very simple answer is it's sort of the right place at the right time. And that's happened quite often in my career. Is that I'm a big believer in you make your own opportunities to an extent, but there's also a timing issue. So I've been, I won't, I think we're going to come back to sort of my career background, but when this came along, I've been working in member bodies since 2005, and it really is sort of it's my profession and I love it. And so I was looking for a member association job, and I found this job advert on LinkedIn so I had the right sort of search criteria in place for it to pop up in front of me. But I'd never heard of the institute before I saw that advert. And it just so happened I was looking, and I think I even I've said this to a couple of people since I've started is that it was the right job for me at the time I was in my career, and I believe that I'm the sort of the right type of leader for the institute in the space that it has reached. So. Yep. It meant that when I had my interview, I was able to say the things that the trustees from the interview panel thought, yes, that's what we need. So I feel very lucky. And as I learned more about the organisation during that interview process, there was a real values alignment. So at its core, the profession is about helping people, and I think that really aligns with my values and sort of what my career has been about as well, obviously, but in a slightly different way to human factors.
Yeah. So with that career path, then, where did you come from? How did you get to meeting us?
Yeah. So when I was sort of thinking about this, is that I think there are. Going back to that values and purpose piece, I think that's been the core thing is that I've been driven to work in the things that mean something to me throughout my career. And I think that's partly been driven by the support I got in my family life. I had a privileged upbringing, to be honest. My parents sent me to a private school. I went to university, and those things are important to me actually because of my extended family, I think the first person who went to a private school was my sister, who was 3 years older than me, and then myself. None of my cousins did. My parents certainly didn't. My parents didn't have higher education either, but my parents were really focused on giving us opportunities that they didn't have, and I feel very lucky to be in that. And as part of that was they really encouraged us to make the decisions that made sense for us from a fairly young age, which I think is a lucky position to be in as well. They weren't trying to push me into any particular profession. It was, they just wanted me to be successful and do the best I could. And so I think I wanted to say that because I think that's been really important about the sort of the journey I've been on. And the two things that really drove me are public service and sustainable development. So I was into sort of politics in my teens. I did a politics A level, but I was also into sustainable development. I didn't know it was called that at the time, but I think my first political act was about 11 years old, buying a CND badge. So this was back in the early 80s, when those of you who were young at that time, that you would have, there was sort of, there was still that threat of nuclear Armageddon, and there would be media about that, and I was really motivated. It was all the time of Greenham Common and things like that, and I was motivated by that. So I joined CND. After that, I joined Greenpeace in my teens, because again, and it was always, there were simple drivers to that. And I remember I was in an environmental group at university, and we had in my first year, I went along, and I was actually a bit saddened. So you join these societies at university. I was at Hull University. There must be I don't know, 8,000-10,000 students there. And the first meeting of this group, I think there was 8 of us in the room, and in some ways I felt a bit sad about that. Going, even this was 1992, I think. Mm-hmm. Even at that time, there was a growing understanding of the climate crisis. And I remember in that room, we all asked to say why we were there. And for me, it was very simple. Is a sort of, if you think of your own personal life, if there's a leak in the roof of your house, you fix it. And the planet is our home, and so if there's something wrong with it, we should fix it. And so that's been a driver for me. So anyway, sorry, a long-winded way of getting into my career, but I think it's important around the decisions I've taken. So and going back to the public service thing, I decided I wanted to work for the BBC at about the age of 16, and so I just laser focused on that. And that's because I really believed in their public service remit, and I still do. I think it is one of the gifts this country has given to the world that we can be really proud of, and it really saddens me that in many ways it's being eroded. And if you take the World Service, it is just so respected around the world, and I think we should invest in it. But anyway, I wanted to work for that institution. I did. I had an entry-level job where I worked in a research library. My first job was basically stamping new books with "This belongs to the BBC," putting the spine labels on, and putting them away. But then once I was inside, I then aggressively tried to find my place, and I landed in online journalism. It was the early days of the internet, and it was possible to get into that, and that's what I did. It always amazes me that the first ever BBC sort of news website was for the 1997 general election, which isn't that long ago, given where you think online is now. So I wasn't working. I started off on intranets at that time, and then I joined BBC News Online about 1999. I worked for Panorama, which was the flagship program, and I was essentially what's called their interactive producer. And I was actually making podcasts before they were even called podcasts. One of the things we did that I really enjoyed is after, so long form journalism, there was a program each week, 40 minutes long. And then we would invite viewers to send their questions in. And then the day after, we would do either an audio and also video, incredibly at that time. And we would do an interview with one of the protagonists from the program. And I loved it. That was really good. So I did that. I left the BBC for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to earn a bit more money. And secondly, because I'd almost reached a ceiling, is that to get on, I wanted to get into sort of management and progress in my career. And to do that, I would have needed to branch out into radio or television, because to get on, you needed to sort of have experience across all of those. And I didn't really have the passion for it. And this goes back to sort of passion being a driver for me. So it felt the right time to leave. I then found a job in Arup, in doing corporate communications. So a lot of ex-journalists go into communications. And in Arup, and obviously we have members in Arup, so I've sort of come full circle a bit, but Arup was a really good landing spot for me because I was very institutionalized in the BBC, but Arup has very similar values to the BBC. Actually, it's obviously not, it doesn't have a license fee, but it's sort of held in trust, even though it's a profit-making company. they had sort of passionate engineers in the way that the BBC had passionate journalists. So really good. I was there for a couple of years, but conversely, the thing that made it a nice landing ground made me want to leave it quite quickly, in that it was very similar to the BBC, and I'd almost wanted to get away from that kind of an organisation and try something new. So it was a really good, I guess, what I would call stepping stone out. But after about 18 months, I sort of felt, it was too similar in some ways, and I wanted to do something different. And that's where I got into member associations and member bodies. And again, by chance, there was a job, I can't remember if it was advertised or someone told me about it, with an organisation called the International Council on Mining and Metals. So a member body for 20 or so of the world's largest mining companies, Rio Tinto, Anglo American. But there were two reasons why I wanted to do that job. It was nothing to do with mining. One, it was their remit was around mining and sustainable development. So it was going and working for an organisation that was focused on improving contribution to sustainable development. And secondly, they had a small staff, and I felt that I wanted to progress and learn more. And I felt if I was in a small communications team, which was 1.5 people when I joined, me and someone supporting me, I could get more experience, running the budget for that team and those kind of things. So I was so pleased I got that job. I was there for 10 years, and I realized as I got in that actually working in member bodies was perfect for me, in that I love consensus building. I love working with people. It was the right profession for me, and it always happened by accident. But I was working on a topic I was really passionate about. The organization was growing, so I grew the team from 1.5 people to, I think we had 5 people in the communications team when I left. Bigger budget, did a lot of sort of raised the profile of the organization. So really good time for me. Came to the end of my lifespan there, and I do think member bodies are quite cyclical. And so it's almost as if you run the same year over and over again, because you have your sort of the same sort of deadline. So if you take the Charter Institute, we have our conference every year, we do the 4 trustee meetings, and I do believe there's a sell by date in that you can come in, help drive an organization forward, but at some point it will become stale again, and it'll be right for you to move on, but also right for the organization to bring someone else in and have new ideas. And I'd reached that point with ICMM. I couldn't find the right next job for me, to be honest, because it was quite niche, and so I actually went into consulting, working for myself, which was way out of my comfort zone, but actually I really enjoyed, and I built up some good clients. I had a couple on retainer. I was working with an organization called CARES, for example, who again very niche, who did certification for reinforcing steel, but really good organization to work with, really lovely people. And then I was headhunted for another role, and it was a really tough decision because my business was starting to take off and I could have carried on, but it was one of those nice moments in my life where I felt that I couldn't make a wrong decision. And I went and joined this body called the Entrepreneurs Organization. At the time, they had something like 14,000 individual members, so very different to ICMM, and in 60 countries around the world, so sort of international as well. And their DNA was all about learning and growth, and helping entrepreneurs to be successful. So again, aligned with myself. But the thing that made me, I guess, laugh is that shows you how very different member bodies are the same, is that in my ICMM job interview, one of the things I said, because it was a communications, I said, one of the problems we've got is we're the best kept secret in the world. And so, I answered that. And then 12 years later, I go to my Entrepreneurs Organization interview, and they said exactly the same thing. One of our problems is we're the best kept secret in the world. And actually, it's quite a nice question to answer as a comms person, because not everyone can be the best kept secret. It's all about knowing who your audience is and knowing the relevance. And I remember one of the things I said to EO that I've said at the one of the council meetings that became a bit of a running joke is that whenever I sort of say to our trustees or staff going, right, who is this piece of work for? I ban the answer of everyone. Nothing is for all 7 billion people in the world. You need to engage with the people who are important to what you're doing. So that was EO, and apologies, I know I can sort of talk about this stuff on and on, but so I left there during COVID. Some ways that probably wasn't a wise idea because the opportunities weren't great at that time. I went and worked for a really exciting startup company, so very different role, working but in the sustainability space, who've got this technology around environmental DNA, where basically they do tracking of animals by taking samples from water or the earth, because all animals leave traces of DNA. It's a really fascinating space around sort of biodiversity management and biodiversity conservation. So I enjoyed my time there. It wasn't the right role for me. The sort of what the organisation did was the right thing, and I helped there, but it wasn't the right sort of role for me long term. So it made sense for me to do that, and that's when I was looking again, and that's where I found the Chartered Institute.
Oh, and then obviously we then give you the challenge of we're the best kept secret
Exactly.
around the things.
Exactly.
No, that's a really interesting perception. I mean, obviously, I've known you now for about 8 months or slightly more than that. But it's interesting seeing them threads that we saw through the recruitment process. Clearly, they're so grounded throughout your career that's really cool. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to find out a bit more about what you actually, how you found the job so far in the CIEHF, but also what we're going to do driving things forward. So we'll be back right after this.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back. Today we're talking to Ben Peachey, the new, or less new now, CEO of the Chartered Institute of Economics and Human Factors, or CIEHF. So Ben, as we sort of alluded to, you've been in post now 8 months, nearly a year. We were sort of suggesting just before this recording started, that's been a very quick period of time. And we've had to really hit the ground running. So how have you found the first 8 months?
I've loved it. It's as I said earlier, it was right place, right time for me, and I think right place, right time for the organisation as well. So it's come together well. So it's flown by, and I think it's flown by because I've loved it. I was given clear expectations, and I did want to sort of labour this point, because I think there's a lot of talk around sort of mental health and well-being, around the challenges of remote working, and I think all of us in our jobs need to know what we're doing, what the boundary conditions are, what's expected of us, and the more we understand that, the more likely you are to succeed. And so yes, I've loved it because I've been able to I guess use my strengths to their best ability, which is a nice place to be. But I am very thankful to the trustees, the staff of the organisation, in the expectation I was given during the interview process have largely played out. So the challenges that I was told about are the challenges I'm working on. Yes, once you get in the door, you learn new things about what's been going on, but there were no major surprises or gremlins there, and I think that's really important. And I'm sure human factors people know this, and I think we'll come on to some of the challenges for the organisation. But human factors people have in their DNA to think about helping others do well and supporting them. So coming in, that's the feeling I've got from the staff and the trustees as well. They've reached out to me, they've asked me how it's going, and I think there's a real opportunity for the profession as well there, because we think like that, and we know that so many people are struggling in so many walks of life, is how can we use that skills and experience to help others and grow the profession. So I think that was really important. I've inherited a great team. That's always really helpful, is I haven't had to come in and just almost sort of redraw what's there. We're working together with the team on making it clearer. We're reviewing job roles, for example, and role descriptions. I think one of our weaknesses has been is that because the team are so committed, one of the things I've said to them is we almost have like a all hands to the pump mentality, which means is that everyone will get stuck in and make sure things happen. That's wonderful. The flip side of that is that sometimes we're not using people's skills and experience in the most optimum way. So that's one of the things that we're working on, but that's a good thing to work on and to make us stronger. And then the other thing that was really good was that the organisation has made some good decisions. We spoke earlier about the sort of that, more focus on the profile of the organisation during COVID, which I think was good. But then there's been some good infrastructure decisions. So we decided to invest in learning. We've got a learning management system. We're about to launch our learning pathways, which I think are going to be really good for the organisation and the profession. And we've also invested in our digital infrastructure as well. So we've got a new CRM, a customer relationship management system. I'll come back to that a bit later in some of the things I want to do for the organisation. But those are decisions that were made and actually largely implemented before I arrived. So my job is then to almost make sure we make the most of those good decisions. So that's I'm very grateful for as well.
No, and as you sort of highlighted, we as an organisation are going through almost a step change where we've been a great membership organisation, whereas now we're almost facing a period or potential period of quite rapid growth of basically everything that we do. You sort of you highlighted that. So what do you think the biggest challenges are that you face then with this changing organisation?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things really, and I wrote about this in my last Economist article, and I guess going back to that sort of communications profession of repeating the same messages is the lack of data. So I think one of the core, I use the sort of phrase sort of the DNA. So human factors people, it's in their DNA to have evidence-based decision making. And I think that, I'm oversimplifying it, but essentially speaking, I've come into an institute that's almost been driven by what I would call hunch-based decision making. We're lucky we have very passionate volunteer members, and again, I'm probably oversimplifying, but it's almost we've got a culture of going, someone has a good idea, and it is usually a good idea, and then we act on it without really thinking it through. And so I really think we need to improve the data and insights that we have. So I'm putting a real effort into that, both in terms of understanding who our membership is. So, how many people do we have who work in the healthcare sector? How many in defence? How many who are in consulting working across the piece? I've challenged the sector groups that we've had to, one of the questions I've asked the sector group chairs is do we have critical mass of membership in your sector? And most of them have said they don't know. And to be fair, that's not their job to know. It's my job of the staff team to give them the insights to help them have a view of that. So I think that is the number one sort of challenge I have, is to sort of make sure we're gathering that data, turning it into insight, and then turning it into action. And then the second one is a sort of phrase I've been toying around with Tina as we build the action plan. And I'm not sure it's the right phrase, but we've called it advancing the profession. So we've only been chartered for 9 years. So in the sort of the world of chartered organizations, we're a baby, you know. And so I think it's really important to remember that we've actually taken great strides in a short time. But I think we do need to learn from those first 9 years, and how do we evolve the chartership. We need a clearer definition of the discipline. I think, you know, we've got this, I guess, again, it's a strength and a weakness, is you can apply human factors in any walk of life, but that does mean that as a small organization there, we could try and chase too much at the same time. So we do need to create some boundary definitions. We do need to have that clear understanding of our relationship with other disciplines. So a lot of people have talked about, for example, the relationship between human factors and user experience, for example. There's a really good, I think, Amanda Widdowson and others, and Amanda's one of our trustees, created a nice little Venn diagram that sort of showed those sort of specialisms where there is overlap, but there are clear things that are different. So really developing those sort of clearer, almost definitions of the discipline. Do we have just one chartership, or are there a number of flavors of that chartership? And then really importantly, building and driving a consensus. It's no good just say me and the trustees going, right, this is the definition of human factors. That needs to be based on engagement with our members and other in the profession, and then building a consensus on that. And also, it's a living beast. It's not a sort of a once and done. It's something that will evolve. And then I want to name check one of your recent interviewees as well, because the other bit of advancing the professions is case studies. And I think it was only last week, actually, I listened to your interview with Martin Bromley, which I think was from March. And Martin, who I haven't met yet, but I hope to meet, is obviously, he's done this incredible work with the Clinical Human Factors Group, and that's an organisation we're actually looking to sort of build stronger relationships with. I've been having conversations with Dawn Benson, who's working there now. But Martin, he used this phrase that if there's one key message I would give to your listeners is to, I'll paraphrase this. He said to take half a page of A4 and write down something you've done that has made a difference, and what difference has it made. And I think I've actually written this in my next ergonomist article that will be due out next month. I've said if we can just get 25% of our chartered members to respond to that call to action, the Institute would have we've got around 500 charter members. So my maths was 125 people. If I had 125 strong case studies, that would be brilliant. So so I just want to echo his call to action and say, please, chartered members, send me those stories.
And I think that is so strong a thing, because we struggle on a day-to-day basis to say, I guess the application of human factors is never seen as a cost benefit at the beginning, because you do the saving up front, and therefore you never really truly know it's missing until something goes wrong, and then you have to fix it, and then that's where the true cost is seen. So it's because it's it's almost like, what's that cheesy phrase, a pump prime or a spend to save. You're right, having them case studies of showing how it's done will give much more power to people to be able to say, this is where the value lies.
I think it is, and I know it's challenging, and I'm going to say, I'll almost encourage you to, there's a snippet from Martin's piece that I love, where he did, the way he introduced this call to action was to basically say he was asking for something, and the answer he got was, well, if you go and look here, there, and buried there, and he just said that isn't good enough, and he's right, it isn't good enough, and I think we can be creative about that, and forgive me because I'm not an expert in this, but it could almost be with, you look at the benchmarking. So you might have done something in your, let's say a rail project, where you did something that stopped something happening, but so you aren't able to measure it because it didn't happen on your project, but maybe the problem that you were addressing happened in a different project that cost it a lot of money. And I think it's really important. We just can't accept, as a institute, as a profession, we can't accept the answer of it's difficult. We need to overcome that difficulty and have those stories.
That's a really good shout. So you sort of think that your time with us, be it sort of 10, 15 years, whatever that period of time is, what do you hope to achieve by the end of it? When do you think job done?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and also almost it's interesting. I went through this process when I was at ICMM of I don't think there's an exact amount of time. The way I looked at there, and I'm thinking, almost sort of feel that at a minimum 3 years, at a maximum maybe 10-ish years, but those things can change because if an organization grows as we plan to do, it may well be that the challenges we have in 8 years' time are very different to the challenges today, and therefore that means that I'm less likely to become stale in my job. So I think there are those sort of variables, but I think the time to leave, the optimum time to leave, is just before you're getting stale. And it's very hard to judge that, but that's sort of one thing to say. But what I want to do, so first off, address the challenges that we've just spoken about, and I think, how will we see that? So having what I would say a more coherent strategy and ambition for the organization. So we in the council meeting in December, I was asked to develop a new strategic plan, and in the December 22 council meeting, sort of 5 months or so ago, I presented almost like an assessment of the last strategic plan, and that strategic plan was successful in that it took the organisation through that very bumpy ride that COVID was, and it did what it needed to do. However, when you looked at it in hindsight, it wasn't measurable enough, and it wasn't tangible enough, and it didn't have enough what I would call of those boundary conditions. Is that in my mind, I've been very lucky. When I was at ICMM, they funded me to go to do an exec ed course at Harvard Business School, which is probably the most toughest and most fulfilling education experience I went through. But we had a strategy module there that I really enjoyed, and one of the good learnings from that is a good strategy tells you both what you should be doing, but also, just as importantly, what you should not be doing. And I think if you're being hypercritical of our last strategy, it wasn't strong enough on the what you should not be doing. And because of the potential for us as an organization to go in so many directions, I think part of my challenge is to sort of let's be a lot clearer on those boundary conditions. And it may well be there are some things we're not going to do, but there may be some things that we know, yes, we should do them, but we're just not doing them yet because we're focusing on these other things. So I think building that, if I can hand over to my successor that more coherent strategy and ambition, I think that I'll be proud of. Secondly, and this links back to the data one, what I would call a clear picture of the evolving profession. So I've actually had a conversation last week. So I think, again, I've mentioned this in my pieces. I want to do another member survey. We haven't done a survey since 2020. And I'm just starting to put together the papers for the next council meeting. So all your listeners can get a heads up on one of the things I want to discuss there. But I'm putting together a sort of a data strategy, and let me try and see if I can remember the piece of it. So part of that data strategy is ongoing surveys of our members. So I think, in previous organizations, this is almost my starting point. We may not end up here, but is that you should do what I would call a set piece regular survey to all of your members, maybe once every 3 years, not every year, but certainly at least every 5 years, shall we say. We need to design that. And it focuses on two things, really. One is what value are our members getting out of the Institute, which will then help us make decisions of what we should do more of and what we should do less of, but also getting that almost that zeitgeist of how is your career in the human factors profession, what is difficult for you, what's going on, so that we have as clear a picture of our sort of state in the world through the eyes of our members. So I think that in a member survey. The second pillar of the strategy is almost the sort of the quantitative stuff, and there are two aspects of that. One is what products and services that we offer are our members using? Do they come to the conference? Are they logging into the website? Are they using the community forums? Are they going to webinars? And really using that. At the Entrepreneurs Organization, I set up a data team in the communications team, and I hired some data scientists, and they developed something I wasn't expecting that was really powerful. So we did this better job of tracking member engagement. And then, for those of you who understand these data things will understand better than I, but they then created an algorithm that would predict whether a member was going to renew or not based on their engagement. And they checked the validity of that algorithm by plugging in the member engagement sort of transactions of all of those members who left the organization. And so we sort of developed the algorithm based on the data we had, and then we plotted it against future. And if I remember rightly, they managed to develop it to sort of 95% accuracy. So wow. Which was brilliant. And so we might do something slightly different to that, but there's lots you can do with the data you have. And then the second part, and this is a call to action as well, is that I do, through, I think, sort of self-service on our website, we want to build a clearer picture of who our members are. So as we talk about, the physiological side, the psychological side of the profession, I was talking to 3 young professionals from Babcock who were at the conference and at a stand. Really good conversation, and they were talking about, getting people into the profession, how they came into the profession. And forgive me, I think 2 of them were psychology undergraduates, and I can't remember the third one, but they said, was human factors mentioned on your undergraduate degree? Yeah. And certainly the 2 psychology graduates, one said yes, one said no. And so one thing I really want to know is if the members are willing to share it, let's build that picture up. What undergraduate degrees did all of our members do? And then we'll understand some other things. And then obviously then the master's degree, what sectors are they working in? But let's build that clearer picture of our membership. Mm-hmm. And then it will help us direct what we do in the future. So I think if I can do that, and then the final element is the sort of almost the external perceptions piece. So go back to my time at ICMM, we did a set piece survey every 3 years. I didn't do the first one, but I did the next 3, that was almost about perceptions of sustainable development amongst leaders in mining. And not exactly the same, but I want to do something similar here, is that how can we build the picture of what senior leaders think of human factors in the healthcare service, in defence, in the rail industry. So that's almost a year 2, year 3 job, but how do we do that external perception study? So if I can hand that over. And then finally, the international role. So we spoke about before, we are a leader internationally. Around 25% of our members are outside of the UK, interestingly. I was surprised by that number, pleasantly surprised, I should say. And now a lot of, and again, I don't know exactly, and I want to learn, but I think some of those are people who have a link with the UK. So our first, I think, I always worry when you say the first, but I believe our first ever non-UK trustee has just been appointed. So Ibrahima Bar. Ibrahima is Mauritanian, lives in Senegal, is joining us as a trustee, and I'm very excited about that. Really pleased he's stepped up to do that. Now, he is obviously not from the UK, but he actually did study at Cranfield, so that he's got a link to the UK in that way. And I'd like to understand how many of that 25% of our members outside the UK have that kind of a link, or whether they gravitated to us in other ways. But the global profession needs to work together. I think you mentioned in your speech at the conference, and I learnt when I went to the International Ergonomics Association meeting, membership of our sister organisations around the world is dropping on the whole. We're sort of stagnating at the moment, even though we believe we can grow. But that's a challenge that we need to address together. So having a clear international role, and the fact is that our members, a lot of our members work in global sectors, so they do benefit from engaging with human factors professionals elsewhere in the world. And then and so if I leave my job handing over a well-oiled machine to my successor, I'll be pleased.
Cool. Obviously we want a well-oiled machine as well, so that's clearly in alignment, which is fab. Obviously our main job as members, I guess, is around that human factors piece, and we get very excited about that. But potentially, you don't have a human factors background, even though you're taking on the active learning about maybe uncovering a bit about what we talked about. How do you separate them out, I guess, because it's you're employed to look after the business side of it. So how do you stop us wittering on about what we're wittering on about in order for you to deliver?
I know I'm sort of tend to have long answers, and this one will be a short answer. It's actually very easy. I'm not a human factors specialist. I'm a member organisation specialist, and part of my job is to get the most out of the human factors specialist. So it's almost, going back to that strategy boundary conditions piece, is that my job is to make it coherent. So when the human factors specialists come to me with a great idea, it's almost my job is to go, well, why are we doing this? Why now? What value is it going to drive for us? So I find that differentiation just very easy.
Cool. So we've sort of talked about where you want to be at the end of the time, but there's hopefully going to be a significant period of time before that. How do you know what a good job looks like on a day-to-day or week-by-week basis?
Yeah, so three things, I think. So financial health and stability, I think, has to be at the core of it, and we have that, and that's not down to me, that's down to what's happened before me. We're a charity, so we have to, and I think it's a good thing, is we reinvest any money that comes in, we reinvest in the organisation and the profession. So having that day-to-day health and stability, I think, is really important. Knowing we can pay our staff, knowing we can deliver on the projects that we said we can deliver on because we have the money there. I think that's the number one. The second one is happy stakeholders. It may sound a bit trite, but it's really important. It's one of my ex-bosses, really encouraged me down this route, is especially in a member organisation, is that there's almost that soft side of it. So when you and I did the first Pulse podcast last week, we were talking about the conference, and there was a positive vibe at that event. You couldn't sort of take it and put that in a spreadsheet, but there was a positive vibe. So happy stakeholders, and what I mean by stakeholders, that is the trustees, that is the members, it's the staff, it's the people we work with outside the organisation, and almost knowing that they're not unhappy as well is part of that. And then finally is having a clear direction and clear ambition, and on a day-to-day basis having a very good understanding of where you are on the path to getting there. I think, and that's sort of quite a big statement, but I don't think we've got that at the moment, but we're working towards it. But if you can do that, then you know. And if we take the degree apprenticeship as a sort of a very small example of that, is I think there is a very clear direction and ambition for that program. And I think we do have a pretty good understanding of where we are on the path to getting there. So the ball's in the camp of the universities at the moment to now develop the courses. There's actually, I've got a job now where it's been on my desk for a couple of weeks, but I think today I'm going to be sending out a survey to the employers in the working group to say, well, how many people are you planning to put through the degree apprenticeship? And so once we get the answer to that, we'll almost start having our ambition of how many apprentices that we want in years 1, 2, and 3. So that's a good microcosm example. But yeah, if across all the things we're doing, if we have that clear ambition and a good understanding of where we're at, I think you're good.
That's really good, because you've given us a really good long term, but also that short term viewpoint about what we should be looking forward to in that basically a healthy organization. We're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to get into your final 3 questions. So we'll be back right after this.
Great.
Just before Barry gets to the final 3, my name's Nick Rome. Let me tell you about this. Technology in our world is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and keeping up with what that means in the human factors world can be challenging. That's where Human Factors Cast comes in. Human Factors Cast is a weekly podcast that highlights and breaks down stories that are chosen by you, the Human Factors community.
New York State is giving out hundreds of robots as companions for the elderly.
Buttons in cars are safer and quicker to use than touchscreen.
A prototype just achieved a major milestone that actually fits the description of a flying car.
The show provides perspective based on experiences from different domains and different industries. We even cover some of the hottest conferences in the field. On this episode, we're recapping CIEHF, Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, Neuroergonomics Conference, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, UXPA International. Join me, Nick Rome.
And me, Barry Kirby.
Every Friday morning when Human Factors Cast drops on YouTube and your favorite podcast directory. And remember,
It depends.
And now I'm going to send it back over to Barry for the final 3.
There's going to be a time where I don't giggle at the end of that, but that now is not that time. It still makes me laugh. So we've kind of done the serious bit of the interview. So what we have now is the final 3 questions that we ask everyone. So do you have a book or a paper or something that you keep on going back to repeatedly? And if it's not, it doesn't have to be technical. It could be a fiction book. I have a habit of reading Hornblower over and over. So what about you? What's your go-to?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a bit if it's all right. I'm going to say a book and 2 ideas, if that's all right.
Okay.
And I've got the book. I'm going to put it up to the camera. So the first 90 days. So this is something that I was introduced to when I did the Harvard course. And interestingly, if you saw, there's a bookmark in there that shows my sustainability thing. I hate throwing things away and buying things you don't need. So I use old train tickets for my bookmarks, and just opened this and I saw it was a Heathrow Express ticket, which isn't so good for sustainability because I must have been going on a flight from 2016 that's in this book. But I read this book again when I started this job, or skim read it, and it's a really good. Anyone who's starting a new job, I would really encourage you to sort of read that book. It just gives you sort of a roadmap for how to spend your first 90 days in a job. What are the questions to ask, how to build out your action plans, and how to prioritize. And it's fantastic. A really great book. And then 2 ideas. So one that I brought to the Institute. One is briefing notes. So one of my ex-boss, a guy called Tony Hodge, who was the CEO at the ICMM, my second CEO there. I've been really fortunate. I've worked for a lot of great leaders in my time. But he always talked about in any decision you're making, there are 2 parts to it. There's the substance and the process. And he said you need to look after both of those at the same time, and I guess I'm a bit of a process junkie, which you probably have seen in our interaction. So because it's really important, especially when you're having a group make a decision, to have clear process so everyone knows how they're contributing, as well as the actual topic area. And the briefing note is something he introduced to that organization. It's really simple format, but when you're trying to brief people or get a decision made, it has a very simple format. It has top thing that says purpose. So what the top, it basically says, title, author of the paper, the date you've done it. And I think it's really important to always write who wrote a document on top of it, because that helps people understand. Then it says purpose. So just a one-line purpose. And what is the purpose of the paper? So what decision are you trying to make today? Or are you just bringing people up to speed on something? Then he talked about what's called the background section, and really important, the background section, because essentially speaking, that is all the history up until all the relevant history up until the point you are. And that, again, when you're trying to do consensus decisions, that helps to bring everyone to the same starting point for the conversation at hand. And that is really powerful, because if you start to try and make decisions and everyone in the room is at a different starting point, it is an absolute nightmare. And I've had those nightmares in the past. So that's really important. Then you have a number of sections that talk about the decision or what you have at hand. And then at the end, there's just a final, is almost like an action required or a next step. So it's a really simple format that can be used for any kind of decision you're making. And I see you nodding your head, because I think the council have found that format really useful since we've introduced it late last year. And then the other idea, it's a very simple, again picked up from Harvard, was I did an exercise there, and I can't say, but I don't go back to it, but I remember it, and it was really powerful. It was almost a thing about, it said to sort of, on a little graph, to plot out your strengths and weaknesses across a sort of few competencies. And then the professor, when we were talking about it, he said, when you look at your own personal development, when we look at our own strengths and weaknesses, it goes, a mistake a lot of us do is that we try and go, right, we need to get everything up to the same level. And he said, no, what you need to do is you need to get your weaknesses up to a good enough level. But to be the best you can be is that whilst you're bringing your weaknesses up to a sort of a, let's say, competent level, at the same time, you should be taking your strengths up to to a soaring level, and you can have more impact that way. And so that's always stuck with me. So even though I don't go back to it, it's always in the back of my mind when I think about where I need to improve.
Cool. So if you could go back in time, and whatever time suits you, but what advice would you give a younger Ben?
Yes, this made me laugh when I was thinking about this one. So there are a few sort of specific things I could think of, and maybe some that I wouldn't want to sort of say to a public audience. But I think I'd boil it down to look after your mental and physical well-being. We only have one body. We only have one brain. If they are functioning well, the decisions you make are easier to take, and they're more likely to be the right ones. And I really believe that. It's I'll give you a couple of examples. So my godfather now sort of passed away. It's actually his wife gave me good advice. I did, because it's quite amusing, is that for those of you who like their films, Michael was my godfather in my childhood, would say the same thing to me every time we met. He'd go, Benjamin, I have one word of advice for you: plastics. And those of you who like your film, it's irrelevant, but it's taken from The Graduate. So Dustin Hoffman's character is called Benjamin, and his godfather says that to him early in the film. He said plastic. So that was a sort of a joke. But actually, the advice I got was from his wife Jennifer. I actually saw her recently at my dad's 80th birthday. It was lovely to catch up with her. In my teens, she would constantly say to me, stop slouching, you'll regret it when you're older. I didn't stop slouching, and I did regret it when I got older. I suffered from a bad back. And then two other examples. The second one is that when I was at university, I loved playing sport when I was young, but I didn't have the most optimum lifestyle when I was at university, shall we say. I was enjoying life, and I wasn't very fit, and I used to get really frustrated. I was so the best player in the team. I was a good player in the team I played for. Or I played with didn't play for a university. I played with a local hospital team actually, sort of, which was good fun. But I would almost always get substituted off after about 60 minutes, and that's because I was out of breath. But we had one year, a guy came and did fitness training with us one year, and he did this thing. He made us run round the playing fields. I think there was about 5 or 6 football pitches. I hate doing endurance health stuff, but he did this really clever thing. Was he made us run round. He said, right, we're going to do 1 lap, and he said, when we get back, I'm going to ask you a few questions about things you've seen on the way round. And if you get them right, we won't run round again. But if you get them wrong, we're going to run round again. And the only guy who got the questions right was the fittest person in our team. He was a Mike as well, actually. And it was a really good lesson for me, because if you are physically on top of your game, you're more likely to be mentally on top of your game. And I think that was really important. And then the final one, and this is especially for me, because we all suffer from varying levels of trauma, stress, anxiety in our life. And when you're going through those, talk to someone. And I've not done enough of that. So I've done it more in my older years, but certainly in my teens and my 20s, and even my 30s as well. I had to deal with a very traumatic sort of health event, not myself, but my wife at the time. And I bottled that up too much at the time, and I wish I'd spoken to people. So when you're stressed or anxious, however intense it is, talk to someone trusted. It will help you.
Absolutely echo that one. So fast forward then to many years ahead, and you decide to retire, and do whatever it is you're going to do when you retire. What would you like to be remembered for?
Yeah, so this is a good one as well. It's almost a similar one. Is that it's and I guess it's because of my sort of focus on process more. Is that there's no thing. I don't necessarily want to be remembered for delivering something or invented something, but when I was thinking about this question, the first thing I thought is I want my children to remember me fondly, and when I'm long gone and they're living their lives, when they think back to what I brought for them is that I supported them and I helped them become the people that they are, and hopefully the good people that they are. And I think, in my work life, I think, being a good person, having energy and making a contribution, if people remember that about me when I come into their minds again, that will make me happy.
Brilliant. Ben, thank you ever so much for taking the time out with us and being so open and sharing with what your your personal background, but also what your aims and ambitions are for your time with us in the CIEHF. What if people want to get in touch with you and either connect with you or ask you any questions or just generally say hi? How would they go around doing that?
Yeah, look, the easiest way is LinkedIn. I do go on LinkedIn most days, so connect with me or send me a message. Do that way, but you can also get hold of me via the Institute's website, ergonomics.org.uk, or send me an email. So I'm b.peachey@ergonomics.org.uk. And the Peachey, always say to people, it's common to miss the E out. So it's the fruit peach, then EY.
And the irony is that when we recently did the Pulse, then Ben actually spelled that out during the recording. I come to master it afterwards and still managed to spell it wrong myself. So yes, all of them contact details will be in the show notes of this episode. So Ben, thank you ever so much for your time. It's really appreciated. And thank you for watching and for listening, wherever you're watching and listening, where you are. And we hope to see you for the next episode.
Thanks a lot, Barry.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.